Taxes, oh joy, for girl and boy. Uncle Sam's call, pay it all. Form frenzy starts, break apart your charts.
And welcome back to the deep dive. You ready for another one?
Always ready to dive in.
Awesome. Well, today we're taking on something I know is on everyone's mind.
Taxes, of course.
Yep, you guessed it, the 2024 instructions for Form 1040, along with all its related schedules.
Sounds thrilling.
Don't worry, we've got a whole stack of IRS publications, forms, and instructions right here.
Our trusty guide.
And we're going to decode all that tax jargon, make it make sense, and highlight all the important changes.
Just stuff that actually matters.
Right, because honestly, who wants to wade through pages and pages of technical language?
No one.
So we've done the heavy lifting for you, sifted through it all.
Like those archaeologists carefully excavating ancient artifacts.
Exactly. And we've unearthed some interesting findings. Some might even say game changers.
Oh, yeah.
One of the first things that jumped out at me was this new direct file thing.
Direct file.
Yeah, it's a new way to file your federal taxes online.
Okay.
And get this, it's free, and it's becoming a permanent option starting in 2025.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Right. I think this could be a game changer, especially for people who've been relying on expensive tax software.
Or paying someone to do their taxes for them.
Exactly. It makes filing more accessible to everyone.
I love that.
So kudos to the IRS for this one.
Yeah, they're stepping up.
Okay, so while we're talking about changes, there's another big one that you need to know about.
Okay, hit me.
Form 1099-K.
Ah.
This one's particularly important for anyone who sells things online, like on those online marketplaces and payment apps.
Everyone uses those these days.
Yeah, so here's the deal. For 2024, if your business transactions on those platforms exceed $5,000, you're going to get a 1099-K.
$5,000.
Yep. But here's where it gets interesting. That threshold drops significantly in the coming years.
Oh, boy.
It goes down to $2,500 in 2025.
Okay.
And then, get this, a mere $600 in 2026 and beyond.
Wow, that's a pretty low bar.
Right, so if you're selling some old stuff online, just a few things here and there, and make $600, you'll need to report that on your taxes starting in 2026.
Even if it's just like old books or clothes.
Yep, even those random things you're selling online could end up on your tax forms.
So basically, everyone needs to be keeping track of their online sales.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a big shift, for sure.
Definitely.
Now, let's say you get a 1099-K, but it's for something you sold personally, and maybe you even lost money on the sale.
Happens all the time.
Or if there's a mistake on the form, what do you do then?
Don't just ignore it.
Right.
Starting in 2024, you got to report those situations at the top of Schedule 1.
Okay.
Even if you don't end up owing any taxes on it.
So it's all about being upfront and transparent with the IRS.
Exactly. They want to see the whole picture.
Transparency seems to be the name of the game these days, especially when it comes to those digital assets.
Yes, picture.
We all know it's becoming increasingly popular, and now it seems like the IRS wants their cut too.
They're finally catching up to the digital age.
Right. So if you received any digital assets, like cryptocurrency, as ordinary income in 2024, you'll need to report that on Schedule 1, Line 8V.
Got it.
No more hiding those Bitcoin profits.
Make sure you're keeping good records, people.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the new things and changes for 2024.
Yeah.
Let's back up a bit and talk about who actually needs to file a tax return in the first place.
Right. Not everyone does.
The basic requirements are pretty straightforward, though, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for the most part.
Everyone can use Form 1040.
Yep.
But if you were born before January 2nd, 1960, you have the option to use Form 1040 SR.
The senior version.
Right. And you know what I found interesting about this whole age thing?
What's that?
If your birthday is on January 1st,
Okay.
the IRS considers you to be age 65 at the end of the year.
Interesting.
So you get a whole extra day of being 65 for tax purposes.
It's like a birthday present from the IRS.
Haha, right. But really, your age and filing status play a big role in determining whether you need to file or not.
That's true.
Like if you're single and under 65, the filing threshold for 2024 is $14,600.
That's the magic number.
But that number changes depending on if you're married, filing jointly, or head of household.
Right? All those different filing statuses.
Now, what about folks who are not married and not living with their spouse at the end of the year?
Living the independent life.
If that's you, and your gross income is at least $5, you'll need to file a return regardless of your age.
$5, really?
Yep, less than a fancy coffee these days.
It's like a participation trophy for being a taxpayer.
But with a lot more paperwork.
Definitely more paperwork.
Speaking of paperwork, let's talk about dependents.
Oh, boy. Dependent.
This is another area where things can get a little tricky.
Oh, yeah.
So you can claim a dependent who lived with you for more than half the year.
Okay.
But there are special rules for children of divorced or separated parents.
Right. That makes sense.
And it's super important to double-check that you have the correct Social Security number for each dependent.
Why is that so important?
Because any mistake with those Social Security numbers can cause a lot of problems.
Like what?
It can delay the processing of your return, and it could even lead to adjustments in your tax benefits.
Like the child tax credit.
Yeah.
Exactly. So getting those numbers right is crucial.
No room for error there.
Okay, so we've got our filing status figured out. Our dependents are all lined up.
Yeah, catchy.
And we're staring at Form 1040.
The big one.
Are there any specific details or quirks we should be aware of?
Absolutely.
Lay it on me.
On page 1 of Form 1040, there's a question about digital assets.
Right.
Remember that transparency thing we talked about?
Yep.
Well, if you received or sold any digital assets during the year, you need to check yes on that box.
Even if you're not sure if you owe taxes on those transactions.
Yep. Better to be safe than sorry.
Okay, good to know. Any other details to watch out for?
Yes. There's a section about reconciling advance payments of the premium tax credit.
That sounds complicated.
It's for health insurance purchased through the marketplace.
Okay.
Basically, if you got those advance payments to help cover your premiums, you need to reconcile them on Form 8962.
And include that with your return.
Right. It makes sure you're claiming the right amount of credit and avoids any surprises when you file. Makes sense. So it's all about being accurate and upfront with the IRS.
To avoid those tax time nightmares.
Exactly. And speaking of avoiding nightmares, let's talk about resources.
Oh, yes.
Because taxes can feel overwhelming sometimes.
Definitely.
But the good news is that the IRS actually offers a lot of free help.
Really?
Yeah. There are programs like Free File and VIT that offer free tax preparation assistance to eligible individuals.
Wow, that's great to know.
That's a huge help, especially for people who are trying to do their taxes on their own.
Especially if they're maybe not super familiar with all the rules and regulations.
Exactly. And what about if, people are facing some serious tax issues,
Yeah.
like a financial hardship, or maybe they just feel like an IRS process just isn't working as it should?
Yeah, like they're running into roadblocks and things.
Is there help for those situations?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
The Taxpayer Advocate Service is a great resource for those kinds of problems.
Okay.
They offer free help, and they advocate for your rights as a taxpayer.
So you're not alone if you're struggling with these kinds of things.
Definitely not.
That's great to know.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, you do have rights as a taxpayer. You don't have to go through this alone.
Right.
The Taxpayer Bill of Rights outlines those key rights, like the right to quality service, privacy, confidentiality, representation, things like that.
So that's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've covered the basics of filing requirements and resources.
Yep.
Let's dive into some of the nitty-gritty details.
Let's do it.
And I know we've mentioned schedules a lot,
Yeah.
and I know those can seem a little intimidating.
They can be.
So can you just give us a quick overview of what exactly are these schedules and how do they fit into the whole Form 1040 puzzle?
Yeah, think of the schedules as separate chapters in your tax story.
Okay.
They provide additional information that doesn't quite fit neatly on the main Form 1040.
Okay, so it's like an expansion pack.
Exactly. And one of the most common schedules you might encounter is Schedule 1.
Okay, Schedule 1?
It's where you report income and adjustments that don't have a dedicated line on the main form.
So it's kind of like the catch-all.
Yeah, for all those extra financial details.
Like what?
Well, let's say you received alimony payments under an agreement made before 2019.
Okay.
You'd report those on line 2A as Schedule 1.
Okay.
But keep in mind that agreements made after 2018, they don't treat those payments as alimony for tax purposes.
So the year of the agreement matters.
It makes a big difference.
Okay, so always good to double-check the rules.
Especially because the tax code's always changing. What applied a few years ago might not apply now.
That's true. So what else might people commonly report on Schedule 1?
Another common one is unemployment compensation.
Okay.
That goes on line 8B.
Okay.
And just a little side note here, some states might issue you an electronic form 1099-G for that instead of mailing it to you.
Oh, really?
So you might have to do a little digital treasure hunt for your tax forms.
It makes sense.
So always good to check your state's website.
Okay, what about that section for other income I saw on Schedule 1?
Yes. Lines 8A through 8 there.
Yeah, that seems pretty broad. What kind of things might fall under that category?
Yeah, it does cover a wide range of things. You might report jury duty pay on line 8A.
Okay.
Any gambling winnings on line 8E, the value of prizes and awards on line 8 meters.
Yep.
It's basically for any income that doesn't fit neatly into those boxes on the main form.
So if I have a hobby that I make a little money from,
Okay.
like selling handmade crafts online?
Yeah,
Would I report that under other income?
that's a great question, and a lot of people get this wrong.
Okay.
You actually wouldn't report hobby income on those lines.
Okay.
The IRS has specific guidelines for hobby income versus self-employment income, and you would actually use Schedule C for that, even if you don't have any business expenses to deduct.
So even if it's just a small side hustle, it's still considered self-employment income.
That's right.
Okay, so Schedule C for that.
Now, in addition to reporting income, Schedule 1 also has a section for adjustments to income.
Okay.
And this is where things can get a little more complex.
Okay.
Think of these adjustments as deductions that you take before arriving at your AGI, your adjusted gross income.
Okay.
They're sometimes called above-the-line deductions
Hmm.
because you can take them even if you choose to take the standard deduction instead of itemizing.
Okay, so these are kind of like special deductions.
Yeah, that can lower your taxable income right off the bat.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say you contribute to a traditional IRA for retirement.
Okay.
You might be able to deduct those contributions on line 20 of Schedule 1, which would directly reduce your AGI.
So it's like getting a little tax break for being responsible.
Exactly. And remember, there are income limitations and other rules for traditional IRA deductions, so you might need to use the IRA deduction worksheet in the instructions to figure out your exact deduction.
Okay, so lots of details there.
And also, you can't deduct contributions to a Roth IRA,
Okay.
but you might be eligible for the retirement savings contributions credit.
So different rules for different types of IRAs.
Always got to check the fine print.
What other adjustments might people commonly take on Schedule 1?
Another common one is the student loan interest deduction.
Yeah.
You report that on line 21, you can deduct up to $2,500 in interest paid on a qualified student loan.
Okay.
But of course, there are requirements.
There always are.
The loan must have been taken out for yourself, your spouse, or someone who was your dependent when the loan was taken out.
Okay.
And the loan proceeds must have been used for qualified education expenses.
So it's not just any student loan interest.
Right. It's very specific.
Got it. And then there's that catch-all line I saw.
Yeah. Line 24, is that it?
For any other adjustments that don't have a designated line.
That's right.
So what kind of things would go there?
You might report things like repayments of certain unemployment benefits, contributions to certain types of pension plans.
Okay, so if it doesn't fit anywhere else?
It probably goes on line 24 cents.
Yeah, okay, good to know.
Yeah.
I guess the moral of the story is always double check the instructions.
Always a good idea.
Make sure you're using the right line for everything. Okay, we've covered Schedule 1.
Yes.
Now let's move on to Schedule 2, where things get a little more, well, taxing.
Ha. I see what you did there.
What kind of surprises might we find lurking on Schedule 2?
Schedule 2 is where you'll calculate any additional taxes you might owe.
Additional taxes.
Yeah, like the alternative minimum tax or AMT.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
Yeah.
What is that exactly?
It's designed to make sure that people with higher incomes and certain deductions pay at least a minimum amount of tax.
So it's like a backup system.
Exactly, to prevent people from slipping through the cracks.
Gotcha. What else is on Schedule 2?
It also covers the 10% penalty for early withdrawals from retirement accounts.
Okay.
But remember those exceptions we talked about earlier?
Right.
Like if you use the funds for a first-time home purchase or qualified education expenses,
Yep.
you might be exempt from that penalty.
Okay, good to know.
But there are strict rules and income limitations, so you got to review those exceptions carefully.
So even if you think you might qualify, double check with a tax professional.
Always a good idea.
What other items might we find on Schedule 2?
You might see the repayment of the first-time home buyer credit.
Oh, right.
The 15-year repayment period for homes purchased in 2008 ends with your 2024 tax return.
Wow, 15 years.
So if you bought a home back then and claimed that credit, you'll need to make your final repayment on this year's return.
Okay, another thing to keep in mind.
And while we're talking about additional taxes, it's worth mentioning the additional Medicare tax.
Oh, yeah, that one.
If your income exceeds certain thresholds, you might owe this tax, and you'll need to use Form 8959 to calculate it.
Okay, so there could be all these extra taxes we need to be aware of.
It's like a hidden level in a video game.
Uh-huh, right.
But hey, the more familiar you are with these schedules, the better you can navigate all those twists and turns.
Makes sense. All right, we've done Schedule 1, Schedule 2.
We're on a roll.
Now, what about Schedule 3?
Okay, Schedule 3.
This one deals with non-refundable credits.
Right.
So what's the difference between refundable and non-refundable credits, and why does it matter?
Refundable credits are like cash-backed awards.
Okay.
If the credit exceeds your tax liability, you can actually get the difference back as a refund.
Okay, so you get money back.
Exactly. Now,
Okay.
non-refundable credits, those act more like coupons.
Okay.
They can reduce your tax liability to zero, but you don't get any extra money back.
So refundable credits are potentially more valuable.
They can be, but they usually have stricter eligibility requirements.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are some common non-refundable credits people might claim on Schedule 3?
One of the most helpful ones is the Child and Dependent Care Credit,
Okay.
designed to help working families offset the costs of childcare.
That's a big one for a lot of families.
It is, and if you're paying for higher education for yourself or dependent credit, you might qualify for the American Opportunity Credit or the Lifetime Learning Credit.
Oh yeah, those education credits.
They can help make college a little more affordable.
Okay, good to know. And speaking of helpful credits, remember that whole age 65 thing we talked about?
Yeah, with the January 1st birthday.
That comes into play again on Schedule 3 with the credit for the elderly or the disabled.
Right, even if your birthday is on New Year's Day, you get that extra day of being 65,
For tax purposes.
which could qualify you for this credit.
So it's like a birthday bonus.
You could say that if you meet the age or disability requirements and your income's below certain thresholds, you might be able to claim this credit to reduce your tax liability.
So many different credits and deductions to keep track of.
It's like a scavenger hunt for tax savings.
It really is. And the more you know about them, the better.
Exactly.
So we made it. We journeyed through Form 1040, dove deep into Schedules 1, 2, and 3, uncovered all those hidden tax treasures. What's standing out to you from all of this?
Honestly, what really fascinates me is this balancing act the IRS is trying to pull off, trying to stay current with, the gig economy and digital assets, but also, making sure things are fair and accurate for everyone in the tax system. It's a lot.
And these instructions are like a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah,
Like-
exactly. Like, how are they approaching these challenges?
It just reminds you that the tax code isn't set in stone. It's constantly evolving.
Always changing, got to keep up with the times.
Right, which means we have to stay informed and be ready to adapt.
Absolutely. Can't just rely on what we knew last year or even what we learned from these 2024 instructions.
So how do we stay ahead of the game?
Well, the IRS actually gives us a ton of resources to stay up to date, publications, online tools, and those free assistance programs we talked about earlier, those are lifesavers.
And if you get stuck or if things get too complicated, there's always the Taxpayer Advocate Service.
They're there to help you through it.
It's good to know we have rights as taxpayers and we don't have to figure this all out alone.
Absolutely. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights lays it all out. It's all about fairness, respect, and transparency throughout the entire tax process.
Okay, well, as we wrap up this deep dive into the 2024 Form 1040 instructions, I have to say I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by how complex this all is.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
But I also feel more confident now about understanding it and actually being able to do my taxes.
That's the goal.
And I think what strikes me most is this effort to adapt the tax code to modern life.
It's a work in progress for sure.
But these instructions show that they're trying.
Yeah, they're making progress.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening. How are you going to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to your taxes? What tools or strategies can you use to make sure you're not surprised by changes down the road? Think about it as we head into the 2025 filing season. And beyond, remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to taxes. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Form 1040. Time to know. File out your tax. No turning back. IRS time. Make it rhyme with line. Income's in, let the filing begin. Taxes due, TFS is here for you. Gift tax form, avoid the storm. Giving gifts, check the tax list. Form 709, gift tax is fine. Generous heart, tax smart from the start. Gift exclusion, no confusion. Tax year's here, no need to fear. Deductions call, stand up tall. Digital assets too, IRS view. Tax laws change, rearrange. Accuracy counts, avoid large amounts. Taxes, oh joy, for girl and boy. Uncle Sam's call, pay it all. Form frenzy starts, break apart your charts. Money's flowing, IRS is knowing. Taxing times, huh? Let's hum a filing sum.